Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about when people try to promote certain types of diets and they say things like ketones are muscle sparing. So if you're on a ketogenic diet, you won't lose muscle, or you won't lose as much muscle as a higher carb diet. Or protein is muscle sparing, so you should always increase your protein more if you want to maintain muscle while you're losing weight. So let me put on my +5 head of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about these ideas, because there are some problems with this. The second one doesn't have a problem until a certain point. Up to a certain point, the second one is actually good advice. More protein to a certain threshold can actually preserve muscle. Beyond a certain threshold, it can turn into something counterproductive as well, and we'll get into that. All right, people who follow ketogenic diets will say that. They'll say ketones are muscle sparing. So therefore, if you have more ketones floating around, have more more fat in your diet, you won't lose as much muscle. Yeah, because ketones have calories. That's the only reason ketones can be muscle sparing, and I want people to understand that. Let's cover that again. Ketones spare muscle because they give your body something to burn for fuel besides your fat and your muscle tissue in your body. Ketogenic diets, actually, when they're measured on a calorie for calorie basis, when protein is equal, and metabolic wards have actually shown to give usually the lowest fat loss. All right, by a small margin. They're actually the least effective diet calorie per calorie for losing body fat. What they do is they let a lot of people eat a lot less calories. That's a big deal. Ketogenic diets for many people are extremely appetite suppressing, so they can make dieting easier. But the truth is, ketones only spare muscle tissue because they have calories. So what does that mean? That means that you would get the same muscle protein sparing effect from anything. Anything with calories in it would do the exact same thing. Some things will do it better. So that means literally you could consume carbs with the same calories those ketones had, or protein, or alcohol. I mean, vodka is actually just as protein sparing as ketones are. All right, it will spare just as much muscle tissue as ketones will. Vodka, rum, alcohol actually will. And I don't recommend people drink much alcohol when they're trying to lose body fat. Not really a good idea. But that will do the exact same thing that ketones do. You know, here's the downside. Yeah, ketones spare muscle tissue because they have calories. You could also just eat more food and get the same effect, because ketones also spare fat tissue. People go, what? If you're burning ketones for fuel, you're burning because you're eating a lot of dietary fat and very few carbs, and you're in a state of ketosis. The ketones are also burned in place of body fat. All right, that's the problem you run into. Yeah, you're burning a lot more fat, but you're burning less muscle and less fat. All right, they're not doing anything magical. They're not doing anything magical. And the reality is, ketones are less muscle sparing than almost every other energy source. You know why? 2 reasons. Number one, they don't have an insulin response. Insulin is muscle sparing. Insulin is muscle sparing. In fact, Alan Aragon presented research on that years ago, and he pointed out that white rice actually produced better nitrogen retention when on a hypocaloric diet, or hypercaloric diet both, or sorry, it was an isocaloric diet and a hypocaloric diet, that it seemed to actually have better nitrogen retention than brown rice. Why? Because insulin spares muscle tissue. Circulating insulin levels, which white rice produces a slightly stronger insulin response than brown rice, actually stops the breakdown of muscle tissue also. Everyone acts like insulin is this terrible, evil substance that makes your body hold on to body fat. No, not really. It also helps preserve muscle tissue. And carbohydrates have something that ketones and fat don't have. Anyone else care to guess? Can you burn ketones in the weight room? Do ketones get burned during high-intensity exercise? And lifting weights is always high-intensity exercise. Even 20-rep sets are high-intensity exercise compared to everything else. No, they burn glucose. They burn only glucose as fuel. Ketones are not capable of fueling your training sessions. You will get better performance on a bit more carbohydrates. Every top expert in the field agrees on this, by the way, in sports nutrition. I don't think there are any exceptions that I'm aware of. If there are, you guys could probably find one, but because you do manage to find one, when you have 100 for everyone who disagree with them, and these are top experts who work with athletes around the world, top researchers, they all agree on that, you don't really have much of a leg to stand on. So people try to be scientific with it, but they're really not being scientific. And I'm going to cover a couple of those experts in a minute that I promise you all of you have heard of. We'll get to them in a minute. Also, let's talk about protein. You know, people will argue, well, just keep increasing your protein. That's only true up to a certain threshold, though. And we're going to fall back to that exact same point about insulin and glucose in a minute. Protein. If you increase your protein, your body is less likely to break down muscle tissue for fuel, right? Why does your body break down muscle tissue for fuel when you're in a diet? Because it needs glucose. Because it needs carbs. It will release more cortisol. That cortisol will break down and cleave the nitrogen off of the protein in your tissue, and your only storage for protein is your muscle tissue, and it will use it to get extra glucose. Right? So it will do the same thing with dietary protein. It'll oxidize it for fuel. Well, you could just eat anything and do the exact same thing. Now, up to a certain point, this is true, though. Your body will slow the breakdown, even on the same calories, if you increase your protein. Meaning, if you're consuming maybe what we need to gain muscle, which is 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. So, in other words, 100 grams of protein is kind of your bare minimum to gain muscle effectively if you weigh 220 pounds, right? If you're overeating enough to gain weight, to gain the muscle weight. If you were to only consume that and you go into a calorie deficit, yeah, your body might start breaking down a little bit of muscle tissue for fuel. Okay, we know that. You usually need to increase it. Again, most experts say 1.6 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight for losing weight and maintaining muscle in a strength training athlete. All right, so that means a 220-pound lifter should probably consume at least 160 up to about 200 grams of protein to hold on to muscle tissue. Now, what throws a big wrench in all of this is you have people like Eric Helms, who did his research on pre-contest bodybuilders, and he found that a lot of them needed more than that. Well, here's the thing. Most people aren't dieting down to contest lean. That's a very small niche of people. Most people who are just trying to get to an athletic body fat, unless they have no sense, in which case, why should we bother to help these people? It's not like we're here in a fitness world promoting competitive bodybuilding. But if people aren't going under about 10% body fat, his recommendations don't hold true. And here's the thing. Yeah, he found that a lot of them needed more protein. A lot of them needed up to like 3 grams per kilogram of body weight. So, in other words, that 220-pound guy might need as much as 250 or 300 grams of protein to get down ultra ripped and still see better maintenance of his muscle tissue. But that's kind of a rare exception. Most people aren't dieting down that lane. For people who aren't, the other rule holds just fine. And here's the other thing. All of that protein didn't preserve their hormones, did it? Because those same studies, what did they see on those athletes? Their testosterone, their thyroid, everything cratered. So, yeah, you might preserve muscle okay, but you're going to lose everything else. Your dick's not going to work. Your metabolism's going to be slowed down. You're going to feel like crap. So why are we doing this to ourselves? I mean, in all honesty, if you're dieting down that lean and you see your blood work, preserving an extra ounce of muscle tissue is probably the least of your concerns at that point, at least from a fitness and health perspective. So it's interesting data, but not that healthy. Now, when it comes to this stuff, as far as preserving muscle tissue, let's go back to what I talked about. I'm going to name 2 experts, one of which, who you guys know, he and I do not get along, to say the least, but he agrees with this statement, and that's Lane Norton. He always tells people that if you're trying to get lean and you're trying to maintain your muscle mass and you're trying to maintain your energy turnover, that you need to keep your carbs as high as you can get away with. As high as you can get away with. And that's a big blanket statement, but it's a really good general rule. He and I might not like each other, but he's right on that case. And he's got the track record to prove it. He's got, you know, he does have a PhD, which he lets everyone know in that field. Who else says something almost identical? How about Alan Aragon? Alan Aragon coaches a lot of natural bodybuilders, but he also coaches pro athletes. He also coaches WWE wrestlers. In fact, he was Stone Cold Steve Austin's nutritionist at one time. He might still be. He also is a nutritionist for several NFL players. He also has a master's degree in nutritional science. So, what does he say? That generally speaking, if you want to get leaner, maintain muscle mass and performance, you need to keep your carbs as high as you can get away with. So what does that mean? That means sometimes even sacrificing protein. Sometimes that means doing extra exercise so that you can eat more calories so that you can get more carbs in. Carbohydrates spare performance. They spare muscle tissue. The insulinogenic response from carbohydrates helps you hold on to muscle tissue. Insulin is not your enemy. It's excessive elevated insulin levels from being insulin resistant is the problem. Having elevated insulin levels from eating carbohydrates when you're dieting, if you're physically active and you lift weights and do cardio, is a good thing. It will help you preserve muscle tissue. And carbohydrates preserve performance. These people are right. If you want to preserve muscle tissue, it's not only about stopping the breakdown of muscle tissue at the chemical level, it's about maintaining performance in the gym. Because when you're in a calorie deficit, unless you give your body a reason to hold on to muscle tissue, it will burn it off as fuel. Why? Because muscle tissue can cause you to starve to death if calories are too low. Your body doesn't know that you're not in a famine. When you're dieting down, all your body knows is you've restricted the food. Restricting your food means your body has to survive. If you're not giving it enough exercise and intense training to maintain the muscle to where your body realizes it needs the muscle so that you don't get injured, what's it going to do? It's going to dump muscle tissue. So in other words, you can't afford to lose training performance in the gym when you are losing body fat if you want to keep all of your muscle tissue. Keeping your carbs as high as you can get away with is the best way to hold on to your muscle tissue because of both the chemical preventing the breakdown of proteins for fuel to get glucose, to get more carbs into your bloodstream, and it maintains your performance because it's your primary training fuel. You cannot afford to lose training performance in the gym unless you want to lose muscle mass while you're losing weight. And carbs are the best way to do that, not ketones, not throwing in an extra 200 grams of protein a day, keeping your carbs up. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.